In this program of the Smartphone Show, I talk you through the different types of smartphone and the one which perhaps is best for you. I put the N70 and SPV C600 head to head. I also look in detail at the new Nokia 3250 music smartphone, the first generation Series 60 version 3. Smartphones everywhere, but which one do you pick? Now before you decide that I've got such a lot of hot hardware here you'd rather burgle my house, I should mention that I've only got most of these on loan and they're all going back, but for a few brief days I've got quite a selection here, and I thought it would be worthwhile running through the advantages and disadvantages of each form factor. This is the largest of all the devices I've got here at the moment, the HTC Universal. Here in its T-Mobile guise is the MDA Pro. A lovely large VGA screen, nice keyboard, a rather gimmicky swivelling hinge, but very usable with Pocket Office applications, PIM apps, a nice web browser interface, and its only real disadvantage is the fact that the camera's a bit iffy, and the overall form factor is just so huge. I really couldn't picture this being used as my day-to-day phone, but for a laptop replacement, this is probably the closest as you'll get at the moment. Closely following on from that, I would say, is probably Nokia's communicator series. Now they do their 9500 communicator, was the one I've also previously featured in the show. Again, a really nice keyboard, nice full-width screen. The only disadvantage is they seem to have discontinued it. If you try and buy one anywhere now, it's rather hard. And they're certainly not being subsidised through the network operators. There's a 9300 and 9300i, a much smaller version with a much fiddlier keyboard and fiddlier joystick. But that somehow falls the point because you haven't got the full-size keyboard. That's the second heaviest device I've got here at the moment. Next in line is probably something like the T-Mobile MDA Vario. We've used this quite a lot in doing hints and tips in the smartphone show. It's got the slide-out QWERTY keyboard, which then switches the screen to landscape operation, so that you can use it as a mini communicator and type in messages using your thumbs. Or you can use it as a standard stylus-based device by picking out the stylus and using it as you would a normal Pocket PC with the full QVGA Pocket PC interface. The best thing about this design is the fact that it is so small. You really can use that as your phone, and you don't look silly in the high street. You can use it as your Pocket PC, and then you flip open the keypad and you've got full access to reply to emails or to type a few notes. Very, very impressive miniaturization indeed. Next up is the UIQ smartphones, all running Symbian OS under the hood, and each with a little flip. This is the P900. There's a 910 model with a little keyboard on the underside of the flip, and their new P990, which is coming out in the next few months, has the flip revealing a keyboard underneath, affixed to the main body. Above it you've got a stylus-driven interface, very much like a palm organizer, but with on top of the Symbian OS and its multitasking. As I say, coming out in the next few months, and there's also a music phone which we're going to review fairly shortly. And then perhaps to the two stars of the current smartphone world in terms of actual availability and performance, I'd say the Nokia N70 and the Orange SPV C600. Very, very similar form factors, very similar functionality in many ways, and both really nice to feel in the hand and not too expensive to buy on the high street or with a phone contract. And we'll be looking at a detailed head-to-head between these two models later on. But which one should you choose? It very much depends on what you want. The main thing I've discovered looking at dozens of PDAs and smartphones is that they all have slightly different form factors and different strengths and weaknesses. For example, the Nokia N70 is a superb smartphone, superb multitasking, plenty of RAM, a camera that can record video at almost TV quality. And yet you really wouldn't choose it, even with an extra add-on Bluetooth keyboard to type up your notes from a meeting. If you wanted to do plenty of messaging, then perhaps a communicator like the MDA Vario with its keyboard would be best suited, and you can type in 100 words, 200 words without too much of a problem. If you're going to do lots and lots of typing, then obviously one of the larger devices with their full width keyboard, the Nokia 9500, 9300 or the MDA Pro, would suit better. These devices are very, very different. Do play with them in a shop before you buy, and do read all the reviews you can. You'll need it. They all have their own unique strengths and characteristics. And one last tip, most of these devices, especially in the Windows Mobile world, they come under different names, but they're essentially the same device. So for example, this is the MDA Vario from T-Mobile, but if you can't get this, then the iMate KJAM is absolutely identical. And there's a similar model in the QTech range, and O2 do this as the XDA Mini S. So do shop around. In the Windows Mobile world, there are 3 or 4 basic designs out at the moment. Try to get the best price you can on the network you want to operate on. Oops. Oh, sorry, just enjoying a game of Pocket Mini Golf on the SPV. Thanks to our friends at ClickGamer.com for sponsoring Smartphone Show number 7. There's hundreds of top quality games for your smartphone. They've got friendly customer service, free demos to try before you buy, and they take PayPal. Here's an example of some of the games on offer at ClickGamer.com. This is Pocket Mini Golf, which you just saw, including the Future City expansion pack. This is Virtual Pool Mobile, a great game, great graphics, including video. Redux Atlantis, an adventure game, and Meteor, a great shoot 'em up breakout. So this is the Nokia 3250 music phone. It's a budget phone, but fairly well constructed. Available in 4 colours, mainly for the youth market, but this is the black version. The only problem, I guess, is the shiny plastic in places, which does tend to attract fingerprints. The standout feature is the swivelling keypad at the bottom. Swivel it by 90 degrees and you get controls for the camera, shutter, zoom in, zoom out, and so on. It's a 2 megapixel camera, although the video recording is down at normal MMS resolution, 176 by 144 pixels, and that's nothing to shout home about. If we rotate it further, you get a music player effectively with music playback buttons, fast forward, review, next track, previous track, and so on. Let's just carry on playing from where we left off. It's a bit of U2 playing, and then we can fast forward within a track or review, and so on. Volume controls via the normal navigator. Now, by pressing the applications button, we can switch away, and you can perhaps check your email or do something else, maybe even browse the internet while listening to music on over the speaker or over your headphones, stereo headphones. And the music playback's pretty solid. I'll just pause it there for a moment because it's getting a bit loud. Now, the only drawback, of course, is that with the bottom keypad swiveled round, yes, you've got complete music control, while using other programs with hardware buttons and without the music player jumping to the foreground all the time, apart from a little pop-up message. That's just to verify that. If I press pause, play, you'll see a pop-up message at the top of the screen there, just confirming what I've done, and then I'll stop it again. The problem, of course, is that if you want to do other work that involves entering text, you've got to have your keypad back. So you switch the keypad back to the front, but then your music control's gone. You're back to being a normal smartphone and having to jump through menus to access your music player. It's great having the hardware controls though, and I can see how this would appeal certainly to its target market, and it certainly makes it obvious that this phone can play music, and to a limited extent it can replace your iPad. Let's look at the music player in a bit more detail. The standard interface here is a bit bare. I think this is probably because this is pre-production firmware and hardware, and I suspect the Windows Media Player album artwork will fit in this space eventually. This 3250 is fully Windows Media Player integrated. There's the pop port, the standard Nokia USB port on the side, plugs into your PC, and when you do so it says, do you want to start this phone in Media Player mode, or in PC Suite mode, or data transfer mode. Just taking those one at a time. Media Player mode means that it will talk to Windows Media Player, and you can synchronize across playlists and tracks just as you would for a Windows Mobile smartphone or any other compatible device. The PC Suite mode is obviously for the standard Nokia synchronization of your Outlook data and copying files backwards and forwards, and the data storage, the data transfer mode, this smartphone appears as a USB mass storage device, which means you can then use it as an extra disk drive, either for transporting files around or simply for a quick way of copying on folders of music manually. Within the music application, there are some interesting settings I'll take you through. The audio settings, there's an equalizer, which is pretty standard, interesting presets for the different frequency response. You can boost bass, treble, mid-frequencies and so on. Of more use is the bass boost, which I found worked very well on this unit, and at last I could hear the bottom end on my rock music tracks. Stereo widening is a bit of a gimmick as always, and reverb didn't seem to make much of a difference, but it's worth having these extra settings simply for bass boost. Also within the menu system here in the music player, there's the music library. This works as in most other players, standalone and within phones. You just simply can either browse by artist or browse by album, and it's all organised for you, and within an album you've then got all the tracks and you can just start playing. You can also compile your own playlists of tracks from different albums, as you'd expect. So let's look at some of the other features of the 3250. I'll put the keypad back in its standard configuration. Now the 3250 uses micro SD. You may wonder, well, why does Nokia choose this non-standard, in the sense that they've never used it before, memory card format? Well, the first inkling is the fact that when you try and look for the expansion card, there isn't a slot anywhere, and you can spend a good few minutes hunting until you realise that you have to turn the keypad through 90 degrees, and then that shows you a very small, slightly marked window on the bottom of the main body. Use your fingernail, if you've got one, to open the slot, and then this is the fiddly part. Use another fingernail, somehow. Use your fingers again to extract it. It's a very fiddly process. I've no complaints really. You're not going to be changing memory cards that often, assuming you buy one of a high enough capacity. But please do not try this on the bus or train or while walking down the street. You will fumble, you will lose your card, and there will be tears. But it's fiddly. Take my word for it. It's very, very fiddly. So we'll try and pop that back in, and we're off and running again. Looking at the 3250 from a smartphone point of view, you'll notice that the main screen looks slightly different to previous Series 60 smartphones. The fonts are spindlier, the icons are smaller, there are more icons on the main screens. This is because Series 60 version 3 is really designed for high resolution screens. That's 352 across by 416 down. This is the standard 176 by 208 pixel screens we've seen on previous Nokia smartphones, and they basically then has retrofitted the new software to the old screen, which means you get slightly blocky fonts. It's a bit hard to read under some circumstances, but you do get used to it. It's just when you put it next to a different Series 60 smartphone with the larger fonts that you see the difference. In terms of memory, there's only 10 megabytes of internal flash storage, but provided you buy a big enough expansion card, this won't be a problem. The RAM is pretty good. That's the memory used for running programs. This has 32 megabytes of RAM, and 20 megabytes is free at boot time for your own programs, and this should be more than enough for running things like Java applications and a web browser and so on. In terms of software, because this uses the brand new Series 60 version 3 and Symbian OS 9, don't worry too much about the acronyms, but it basically means this is all new. No previous Series 60 programs, and I mean none, will work on this device. Now don't get too down about this. The change had to happen at some point. Symbian OS 9 in particular is a major step forward under the hood in terms of the architecture and what it takes to build a smartphone and how cheaply you can build it. So I can see why they went down this route. And now that the change is done, it's done. And most programs are fairly easy to recompile for the new operating system. So we should see most of our standard and favourite Series 60 third-party programs being produced for the Nokia 3250 and for other Series 60 version 3 devices fairly shortly. Let me give you a tour around the other applications I haven't mentioned so far. Gallery is the gallery as seen a year or two ago. They obviously used the code from things like the Nokia 6630 rather than the new fancy N70 and N90 gallery. It works well enough. but there aren't quite so many bells and whistles. Within the media folder you've got a real player, which Nokia seem to like for playing back 3GP and MP4 video clips. There's also a flash player for playing back very simple flash multimedia presentations and flash games. The web browser in the 3250 is the next generation Nokia browser. You've probably read quite a bit about on the web. You can render pages at full desktop resolution and scroll around using an innovative system whereby it shows you whereabouts on the page you've got to. At any point you can bring that back up and say I want to look there, and you're there. It works very well indeed. We'll leave the exact features of this web browser for a different day and a different tutorial, but suffice it to say it's pretty capable. Interestingly, also on the application screen is services, the old WAP browser from previous generations of Series 60 smartphones, because the new browser doesn't support WAP. Within Organizer, the standard Outlook synced calendar and notes, of course, and you've got your contacts on the main screen. There's a basic file manager, although it doesn't show you any of the hidden or system files as usual, and the always handy alarm clock and world time facility. In terms of problems I found with this, the joystick I found was a bit over fiddly. If I was trying to use a game using this joystick, I think I'd get frustrated very quickly. It's just about okay for general smartphone use, and especially with a bit of a fingernail you can get your nail around the side of it and nudge it in the right direction, but it's not a patch on the big navigators in for example, the Nokia 6630, N70 and 6680. There's no 3G data, which may disappoint some buyers, but again this is built to a price, and I'm guessing that the 3G electronics add significantly to the overall build cost. There's also no A2DP, which is the support for stereo Bluetooth headsets, which may disappoint more people, especially if they're buying it for music. In summary then, there's a lot to like about the 3250. Despite the lowish resolution screen and the slightly fiddly joystick and the lack of initial applications that are compatible, it does what it sets out to do. It does it well, it does it solidly, it doesn't feel like it's about to break, and I think it will sell well into its target market. And as more and more software comes on stream, more and more games especially, I think this handset will take off. Perhaps most importantly, it's our first example we've seen of a Series 60 version 3 Symbian OS 9 handset released into the wild and available, and this is very interesting indeed, and we'll keep you posted on future developments. And so to the promised head-to-head between the Nokia N70 and the Orange SPV C600, perhaps the two leading exponents of the smartphone art today in March 2006. Both very available and for reasonable prices on high streets, so this is not pie in the sky, this is stuff you can do today. Very, very similar form factors. The SPV C600 is just very slightly slimmer and perhaps lighter, but both very, very similar in terms of roundedness and feel in the hand. Overall system RAM, that's the memory for running programs, is similar on each of them. In either case, you're not going to run out of memory, whatever games or satellite navigation systems you decide to boot up. Multitasking on the N70 is as good as ever with Symbian OS under the hood and Series 60. You press and hold the Applications button, and a list of programs that are running pop up, and you can scroll to and select the one you want. Now with Windows Mobile 5 on the C600, there's a similar program, Task Manager, and again, as we described in the last smartphone show, you just move to the one you want and press the select key, and you're instantly up on and running in that program again. In terms of Office software, the N70 comes with a third-party suite, QuickOffice, which lets you view Word and Excel files that have been emailed to you or beamed in. Nokia have licensed this, and it appears in most of their phones. It's now quite familiar and works quite well. The C600 comes with nothing, but it is fairly simple to buy a $25 Office suite called Clearview from a company called Westech. I'll give you the URL for that, and that adds in the same Office viewing functionality. In terms of the software scene generally, it's very, very similar. The games I was looking for and the applications I was looking for, in almost all cases, are available for both platforms. In the old days, you'd pick the application you wanted and then find out which smartphones, which PDAs run that program. These days, most developers are developing for multiple platforms, so this shouldn't be so much of an issue. In terms of hardware, there's a really good camera in the N70, as I've described previously. It's 2 megapixels, crystal clear, and you can take video up to near TV quality, which is just mind-blowing on a smartphone. The SPV, like most other smartphones, run-of-the-mill smartphones, 1.3 megapixels only. It's okay for occasional use, and video is strictly for MMS. You can't take video and then show it on a big screen. One area where the SPV kicks the N70's butt is in terms of web browsing. With Pocket Internet Explorer, one of the stars of the Windows Mobile 5 firmament, with one column default and desktop mode, web browsing really has never been easier on a device this small, and I'm very impressed. The N70's web browser is a tiny bit clunky. You can get a version of Opera for Series 60, but again, I've never been entirely convinced, and I would say that the SPV has the edge here. Both smartphones have a very similar active standby screen, which giving you a summary of today's appointments, quick shortcuts to applications, and so on. The SPV comes with a mini USB and a standard 2.5mm 4-way headset. Slightly more standard connectors than the Nokia's, very thin charging port and pop port. But once you've got the accessories and you've got set up, so there's no real big issue here. The SPV does have infrared, which may be an advantage if you're looking to beam stuff or receive from people with older PDAs, for example. In theory, Symbian OS, as used in the N70, is more robust, and in theory it will crash less often, you reboot it less often, and things will go right more of the time. This is true, but I have to say with Windows Mobile 5, especially in the smartphone form factor, it's also pretty bomb-proof. I haven't had a single crash with this in weeks of use, so take this with a pinch of salt. But Symbian OS is British, Windows Mobile is American. Maybe that's an issue for you. A few other points that I noticed. The expansion card I've spoken about before in Smartphone Show, it's hot swappable on the N70. You simply open the slot and take out your card. With the SPV and with other Windows Mobile 5 smartphones, you have to take the whole battery out, power the device down in other words, and then wait while it powers up again just to change cards. So if you're planning to change cards, perhaps for music or movies, then you really will have to think about that. That's a bit of an issue with the Windows Mobile devices. Music playback, both will handle MP3 of course. The Nokia will seem set on AAC, which is a similar system to that used in iTunes, although interestingly it won't play iTunes encrypted files. The Windows Mobile 5 will play Windows Media Audio files, which is now a pretty efficient way of encoding your music, and that works very well with Windows Media Player, so again depends on how you organise your music on your hard disk. Other differences I've spotted between the two: the N70 synchronises the whole of the Outlook PIM dataset, the calendar, contacts, to-do and notes, whereas the C600 misses out notes for some reason. Again, as with the Office Sync and Clearview Office, there is third-party software you can add to this to add this synchronization back in, but it's not ideal, and it's nice that the Nokia Series 60 device has this out of the box. On the other flip side, of course, the C600, being a Windows Mobile device, has better support for Outlook's categories, so if you use Outlook categories on the desktop, you'll find they synchronize across better and more clearly to the C600. I've noticed while we're talking about text editing that there are extra buttons on the N70, which sounds like a trivial thing to mention, except for the fact that having a dedicated edit text button means that you can do a whole range of extra things when entering text, such as selecting text, cutting, copying, pasting, using the clipboard, and generally saving yourself time by putting text in multiple places, and that's an area where the SPV lags behind. I've also noticed that the N70 is just a bit quicker in day-to-day use. Maybe it's the fact that I'm more used to using the multitasking, I know my way around, but some things on the C600 are a bit slower, and opening some programs can take 2, 3, maybe even 4 seconds while the data is loaded. But provided you use the multitasking properly, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle to switch between the running programs on either device. A final point, a final differentiating factor is the fact that the N70 is 3G. So you'll notice this extra camera on the front. That's a VGA camera so that you can take part in video phone calls. C600 is not 3G. Not perhaps a problem to most people. I've never actually made a 3G phone call in my life, but if you're looking for 3G, that's one more point to bear in mind. So, N70, C600, which is the ultimate smartphone, which is the right one for you? I hope I've given you some pointers of things to look for and differences, and you'll say, oh yes, that clinches it for me, or I'm not so sure about that feature. For me, I think the N70 is the superior device. It wins on more fronts than the C600, but hey, 5 years ago, if you'd presented me with either of these smartphones, I'd have thought I was in heaven. The functionality in the form factor is pretty phenomenal.
Thanks for watching over the last marathon 26 minutes. This has been Smartphone Show number 7. Here's the URL on the web, www.smartphones-show.com. Thanks to all the sites who help keep publicising the show. Do visit, do tell your friends, and thanks also to Sirius6.com on Orange PR for lending us gear.